Was Yahweh a secret name known only to ancient Israel? Or was he already known across other cultures long before Israel even existed? The assumption that Yahweh was exclusively Israel's God is a common one, but the biblical record quietly points to a broader truth. Long before Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, before the formation of the 12 tribes, and even before Jacob was renamed Israel, the name of Yahweh was already present among early humanity. This challenges the idea that knowledge of the divine was confined to a single people group. Genesis 4:26 gives us our first glimpse into this mystery. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. In the original Hebrew, the Lord is written as YHWH Yahweh. This verse occurs in the days of Enosh, Adam's grandson, just a few generations after creation. The use of Yahweh's name so early in human history shows that divine communication was already underway outside the context of any covenantal nation. This isn't a minor detail. It reveals that worship of the true God began independently of later religious institutions. Individuals and families scattered across early civilizations were seeking and responding to the divine presence by name. Yahweh was not a regional deity invented by Israel, but a name that resonated with people from the dawn of humanity. Such evidence reframes our understanding of biblical history. It shows that God's reach was never bound to ethnicity or geography. The name Yahweh echoed through time not as a national slogan, but as a call to all who desired truth, even long before the emergence of the people who would carry his name into history. Did you know the name Yahweh appears in the Bible long before Moses ever heard it from the burning bush? Many people associate the name Yahweh with the dramatic moment in Exodus 3, where God reveals his identity to Moses. But surprisingly, the sacred name rendered in Hebrew as YHWH appears far earlier in the biblical timeline. One of the earliest instances is found in Genesis 4:26, which states, "Then men began to call on the name of the Lord." The word translated as Lord here is Yahweh, indicating that early generations of humanity were already invoking this specific divine name. Even more striking, this occurs during the time of Enosh, just a few generations after Adam. There is no mention of a formal priesthood, no covenant, no nation, yet people were already calling upon Yahweh. This suggests that the name was not introduced as a new revelation in Exodus, but rather reintroduced to a chosen people who had forgotten it or needed to be reminded of its significance. The continuity of the name Yahweh across generations well before Israel's founding implies a long-standing divine-human relationship. This knowledge was not isolated or secret, but seemingly embedded within the early fabric of human worship. The use of Yahweh in these ancient contexts challenges the narrative that God's self-revelation began with Israel. Instead, it hints at a deeper, older connection between the Creator and humanity, long before the emergence of national identities or religious systems. This early invocation of Yahweh reinforces a central biblical theme that God was never distant, never absent. His name, presence, and power were already known to those who chose to seek him, regardless of whether they belonged to Israel or not. When Abraham arrives in Canaan and builds an altar, Genesis 12:8 records that he called upon the name of the Lord. Once again, the original Hebrew uses YHWH, or Yahweh. This is not the language of discovery, it's the language of recognition. Abraham wasn't inventing a religion or meeting a foreign god. He was calling upon a name that had likely been passed down through generations of seekers, even amid a world increasingly dominated by idolatry. Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldeans, a region known for polytheistic worship. Yet in the midst of this environment, Abraham is portrayed as someone who responds to the voice of Yahweh and calls upon him by name. This suggests an inherited spiritual memory, possibly from earlier patriarchs like Enosh or Noah, preserved quietly through time. Yahweh's name may have remained alive among a faithful remnant, even as cultures drifted toward other gods. This lineage of remembrance is supported by Genesis 26:24, where God tells Isaac, "I am the God of your father Abraham." The continuity implies Yahweh was not only Abraham's God, but known within his ancestral line. It challenges the idea that Israel's worship began in a vacuum. Rather, it was part of an ancient stream of knowledge that Yahweh was preserving and reactivating. The implications are profound. Yahweh's worship may have survived through corrupted generations, not as a dominant religion, but as a quiet thread among the faithful. This reinforces the idea that God was never disconnected from the world. Even before Israel, Yahweh was being worshipped by individuals who remembered his name and responded to his call. In Genesis 14, 18, 20, a mysterious figure steps briefly into the biblical narrative. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. This encounter happens long before the Levitical priesthood, centuries before Moses receives the law. Yet Melchizedek not only serves as a priest, he blesses Abraham and receives a tenth of everything Abraham owns. Most strikingly, Melchizedek is described using the term El Elyon, God Most High, yet in Hebrews 7, the New Testament links him directly to Yahweh, even comparing him to Christ in form and mystery. This raises a profound question. How did Melchizedek, with no genealogical connection to Israel, come to represent the Most High God? Hebrews 7:3 deepens the enigma. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This isn't just literary flair, it indicates a timeless spiritual authority that precedes and transcends Israel's covenant system. Even more compelling is Abraham's reaction. The patriarch, who himself heard directly from Yahweh, recognizes Melchizedek's spiritual legitimacy, submitting to him through tithes. This mutual recognition suggests they worship the same divine being, despite coming from entirely different regions and traditions. Melchizedek's presence in the biblical narrative is not incidental. It reveals that priesthood to the true God was not exclusive to Israel. Yahweh had representatives even in forgotten cities like Salem, later Jerusalem, long before any temple was built. This underlines a crucial truth: God was planting seeds of divine knowledge far and wide through people who held no national claim to Israel, yet still walked in truth. Melchizedek reminds us that Yahweh's reach was already global, subtle, but sovereign. Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, is one of the clearest examples of a non-Israelite who knew and worshipped Yahweh with reverence and insight. In Exodus 3:1, long before the Ten Commandments were given, Moses is introduced as tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. The text doesn't frame Jethro as a pagan or idol worshiper. It calls him a priest, implying a legitimate spiritual role. Later in Exodus 18:9-12, after witnessing Yahweh's deliverance of Israel from Egypt, Jethro explicitly blesses the name of Yahweh and offers sacrifices. "Blessed be Yahweh, who delivered you." Now, I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods. What's significant is not just that Jethro uses the covenant name Yahweh YHWH, but that he is welcomed into spiritual fellowship with Moses, Aaron, and the elders of Israel. There is no rebuke, no correction, only a shared meal before God. This level of acceptance implies spiritual alignment. Jethro wasn't converted on the spot. He was already a worshiper who recognized Yahweh's hand in the Exodus and responded in kind. The region of Midian, situated in northwestern Arabia, was outside of Israel's territory and religious system. Yet here was a priest functioning in a parallel divine knowledge whose counsel and faith were honored. In fact, Jethro later advises Moses on leadership structure, a suggestion Moses implements directly, Exodus 18:17-24. Jethro's story affirms that Yahweh's worship was active in lands beyond Israel, and that sincere seekers were already walking in spiritual truth. His presence in the narrative is not incidental. It reflects a divine pattern of working through people in every culture, long before institutional religion was formalized. Jethro stands as a quiet but powerful witness that Yahweh was already known and honored far beyond the borders of Israel. The story of Job offers one of the clearest and oldest examples of a non-Israelite who had a deep personal relationship with Yahweh. Though the book does not mention any connection to Abraham or the emerging nation of Israel, Job consistently refers to God using the divine name Yahweh. In Job 1:21, after experiencing profound loss, he declares, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The Hebrew text uses YHWH, confirming that Job knew and invoked Yahweh directly. Job lived in the land of Uz, a region not associated with Israel and likely located in northern Arabia or Edom. Despite this geographical distance, Job's understanding of God is sophisticated and intimate. He wrestles with divine justice, longs to present his case before God, and even proclaims, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Job 19:25. This is not the language of myth or superstition. It reflects a profound theological insight that mirrors later revelations in Scripture. The book also shows that Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu, though flawed in their arguments, possess a framework for moral and spiritual dialogue. Their debates suggest that knowledge of Yahweh, or at least the Creator's nature, was not exclusive to Israel. They speak of divine discipline, righteousness, and judgment in ways that align closely with later biblical principles. Scholars often date the book of Job as one of the earliest writings in the Bible, possibly composed during the time of the patriarchs. If this is accurate, it affirms that worship of Yahweh predates Israel not just by generations, but by a well-established tradition of reverence, prayer, and personal faith. Job's story demonstrates that the Creator was already engaging with individuals far from the promised land, revealing himself to those who sought him with integrity and spiritual hunger. Balaam, a diviner from Pethor, near the Euphrates River, stands out as one of the most enigmatic figures in the Bible, a non-Israelite prophet who heard directly from Yahweh. In Numbers 22:9, it states plainly, God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" The Hebrew word used for God here is Elohim, but just a few verses later, Balaam refers to Yahweh by name. "The Lord has refused to let me go with you." Numbers 22:13, using the sacred covenant name YHWH. This shows not only that Balaam recognized Yahweh's voice, but that he could distinguish him from other deities, a rare and remarkable spiritual sensitivity for someone outside Israel's covenant community. What makes Balaam even more compelling is Yahweh's willingness to engage him in direct dialogue. This interaction is not symbolic or vague. It's as personal and clear as the conversations God had with Abraham or Moses. Although Balaam is later condemned for greed and spiritual compromise, 2 Peter 2:15, Revelation 2:14, his initial role in the narrative reveals an important truth. Yahweh's voice and authority were not restricted to the borders of Israel. Even more astonishing is Balaam's series of oracles in Numbers 23:24, where despite being hired by Moab's king Balak to curse Israel, he blesses them instead under divine compulsion. His words include one of the earliest messianic prophecies in Scripture. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." Numbers 24:17. These are not casual statements. They show that Yahweh used even flawed individuals outside the covenant to declare his plans. Balaam's story is complex and morally cautionary, but it also reveals a profound reality: Yahweh was not a hidden God. He revealed himself even to those from distant lands and questionable motives. Balaam's prophetic experience affirms that spiritual awareness of the true God extended beyond Israel, and that Yahweh's sovereign purposes could be voiced through unlikely messengers when it suited his will. The cumulative evidence across Scripture makes one thing clear: Yahweh was revealing himself far beyond the confines of Israel, long before its national identity was formed. From Enosh to Balaam, individuals in various regions and cultural contexts, none of them Israelites recognized, invoked, and even served Yahweh. This pattern is not a coincidence or a narrative footnote. It is a consistent theological thread woven throughout the biblical story. These early worshipers did not operate under the Mosaic covenant, nor did they follow Israel's ceremonial laws. Yet their recognition of Yahweh's sovereignty and holiness suggests that divine revelation was already active across geographical and cultural lines. The Apostle Paul affirms this in Romans 1:19-20, where he writes, "For what can be known about God is plain to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world." This means that God's self-disclosure wasn't limited to one people group, but rather extended to all humanity through nature, conscience, and direct encounter. These early accounts are deeply significant because they demonstrate that Yahweh's relationship with humanity predates Israel's formation and supersedes any single nation. Figures like Melchizedek, Jethro, Job, and Balaam show that the true God was already planting seeds of faith in hearts across the ancient world, quietly but intentionally. This wasn't about religion by inheritance, but about divine response to those seeking truth. God's redemptive plan has always been global. Israel was chosen as a vehicle for revelation, but not as the sole recipient of God's presence. The scriptures consistently portray Yahweh as the creator of all who speaks to anyone willing to listen. This wide-reaching spiritual accessibility reminds us that the divine narrative is larger than borders, bloodlines, or religious systems. It is a story that begins with creation and moves toward a restored humanity, where every nation, tribe, and tongue is invited to respond. The examples of early non-Israelite worshipers of Yahweh carry a timeless message. Divine connection was never limited to cultural background, religious training, or national origin. In each case, whether it was Job in the land of Uz, Jethro in Midian, or Balaam in Mesopotamia, God met people where they were speaking in ways they could understand and respond to. This truth challenges the notion that spiritual legitimacy is confined to specific religious structures. It shows that Yahweh's criteria has always been the heart's sincerity and the willingness to seek truth. This has powerful implications for the present. Many today feel like outsiders to religious tradition. Some worry they lack the proper lineage knowledge or community to approach God, but the biblical narrative dismantles that fear. Yahweh consistently reached out to those who were spiritually awake, even if they were outside the formal boundaries of Israel's covenant. Whether they were desert priests, wandering patriarchs, or unlikely prophets, God honored their responsiveness more than their affiliations. The New Testament echoes this universal accessibility in Romans 10:13. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That Lord is Yahweh, now fully revealed in the person of Yeshua Jesus, whose name literally means Yahweh saves. This is not a new message, but the fulfillment of an ancient reality. God has always been calling people to himself, long before they even knew his name. You don't need to come from a religious lineage to know Yahweh. You don't need to have everything figured out. If your heart is open like Job's, like Jethro's, like Abraham's, then you are already part of the long, quiet stream of those who have responded to his call across time and culture. This is not just history, it's an invitation. The consistent thread running through the accounts of Yahweh's worship before Israel is this: God's plan has always encompassed the entire human family. From the earliest days of Genesis to the diverse encounters found throughout Scripture, Yahweh revealed himself to individuals across cultures, regions, and timelines. This was never a side theme, it was the foundation. In Psalm 113:3 it declares, "From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised." This verse reflects a divine intention that transcends geography and ethnicity. It speaks of a universal God whose presence is not limited by national borders or religious structures. Israel, while chosen for a specific covenant purpose, was never the exclusive recipient of God's attention. Instead, they were called to be a light to the nations, a conduit through which the world could see Yahweh's justice, mercy, and truth. But the worship of Yahweh didn't begin with Israel, and it certainly didn't end there. Long before the tablets of Sinai and long after the kingdom of Judah fell, God continued to call and respond to hearts who sought him in sincerity. This broad reach of divine relationship redefines what it means to be part of God's story. It isn't about where you're from or how much theology you know. It's about recognizing the Creator's voice and responding in faith, just as ancient figures like Job, Melchizedek, Jethro, and others once did. These early seekers remind us that Yahweh's desire for connection predates organized religion and outlasts cultural boundaries. The gospel itself is the ultimate extension of this truth. In Acts 110:34-35, the Apostle Peter proclaims, "God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." This echoes the same principle seen from the very beginning. Yahweh has always been calling all people quietly, patiently, and universally. And today that call still echoes across the world, inviting every soul to take its place in the ancient, ongoing story of divine communion. Yahweh's story didn't begin with Israel, and it doesn't end with us. From ancient lands and forgotten names, he has always been calling those who seek truth. If this opened your perspective or sparked new questions, let us know in the comments. Your insight could shape future videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more hidden teachings that connect the ancient world with timeless truth.